Shalom everyone to Living with the Times. This week's Parsha is Ki Tisa, and in this Parsha there is mention of Shabbat. Now Shabbat is mentioned many times in the Torah, each time revealing new ideas, new laws about Shabbat. But in this Parsha it's one of the main descriptions of Shabbat. And in it is the passage that we recite Friday night before the Amidah, the standing prayer. And it's usually sung. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat. And continues. That's in this week's Parsha. But before that, it explains this idea of desecrating the Shabbat. What happens if someone publicly desecrates the Shabbat after warning? And the punishment is a death penalty. Now, we know that in the Torah there are many, many different mitzvot where the penalty is a death penalty. But we also know that virtually they were never, ever carried out. So the question is, so why is it described as a death penalty? So in the simple way, we could say this is a deterrent. It's a way to let us know how serious desecrating the Shabbat is. That's one way to look at it. According to Chassidut, everything in the Torah becomes relevant to us today and relevant for the soul and in every generation. So the Slonim Rebbe, in his classic work Natifat Shalom, so he explains how we can understand this in today's terms. So first of all, the word for desecrate the Shabbat, the root word is chalel. L'chalel at the Shabbat, chilul Shabbat. But these letters and the root of this word means many different things. One is mundane, like when we do Havdalah, and we separate bein kodesh l'chol. Chol, mundane, from the holy. We separate from the holy from the mundane. Well, that mundane, chol, that's the same root as chilul Shabbat. So it means to make mundane, to desecrate. But it also means a corpse is called a halal. And a hole is also the same root, a chol. And so the Slonim Rebbe explains that when we observe Shabbat, if our thought, speech, and action goes away from the spirit of Shabbat, the spirituality, the bliss, the peace of Shabbat, and we're thinking about all kinds of things that probably we shouldn't think about anytime, but especially on Shabbat. Our speech, we're talking about things that are not relevant to Shabbat, making plans and complaining, whatever it is, or our actions are not in tune with the laws of Shabbat. So the Slonim Rebbe says that we make a hole in Shabbat. In other words, chilul Shabbat, desecration of Shabbat, is making a hole in Shabbat. And we can imagine, let's say, the circle of Shabbat is all holy. Shabbat Kodesh. L'kavod Shabbos Kodesh. But then we start thinking non-Shabbos kind of things. We start speaking. We start doing things that are not Shabbosdik. So we are killing, part of Shabbat. We're making a hole in the Shabbat. So this is just a very, very beautiful way to understand what it says in the Torah, that there's a death sentence. But the death sentence, really what it's talking about is our own experience of Shabbat. We're killing the holiness of Shabbat. We're killing the opportunity to be in this really inner dimension of spirituality that is Shabbat, the bliss of Shabbat. We're told Shabbat is 1/60th of the world to come. We're holding on to the world to come. And so when call it unshabbosdik, we're making a hole in the Shabbat. So my blessing is, instead of making a hole in Shabbat, and we'll spell it H-O-L-E, we have to make our Shabbat whole, W-H-O-L-E. And each one of us has that opportunity. So we should be very, very careful that not to allow our mind, not to allow our speech and our action to veer away from the wholeness, the completeness, the sanctity of Shabbat. And Bezrat Hashem, all of us will learn to make our Shabbases whole.